Well, this is the final video in this series, the 15th. If you've actually viewed all the videos up to this point, you have watched nearly 4 hours of videos. This one will conclude a little bit over 4 hours, I believe, but not much. And I'll just summarize for you one more time what you've seen on the individual videos in terms of conclusions. If you've actually studied these or looked at these in any kind of detail, I think most any one of you could come up with the same set of conclusions that I will demonstrate to you in this final series. But basically you have hopefully gotten the opinion that I believe that evolution is not true and that biblical creation is the one that wins the battle for the best explanation for the existence of life on earth. And we'll just look through some of these conclusions and review some things that we have seen so that we can kind of wrap this whole area up. You've seen this slide before with the science battlefront. I think this was in the introductory video with the science battlefront for over 150 years being fought with creationism as a science and evolutionism as a science, and there's really been no resolution to that battle. It has never ended. It just continued up to the very recent times. In my own opinion, that battle is over. It was a poor choice for a battle anyway, because what I have concluded is that biblical creation is history. It's not science. So there's no point to argue why biblical creation should be taught in the science classroom. It is not science. It is history. It is something that is reported in the Bible to have happened, but it doesn't tell us how it happened. And if you remember, I coined the phrase historical creationism to mean this. It's biblical history with scientific support. And I've demonstrated to you all the scientific support for not only biblical creation, but some of the additional parts of Genesis that may have initially have seemed to you a little bit unbelievable, but that still have strong scientific support. The situation right now is either think of it as a new battlefront or the battle is over and they're just two separate areas that are investigating their own areas to try to come up with the ultimate explanation for life on Earth. Creation history is gaining more and more scientific support over time, not scientific proof, but scientific support. And evolution science, as you have seen in the various view graphs, it's kind of in a wait state here with this special forces guy or the soldier on their side, whether that's evolutionary biologists or someone else working in one of the other sciences allied to evolution science. They no longer have to fight a battle, they just have to work on their science itself. And as you'll see in a few minutes, I've concluded that really evolution theory is not a science yet. It's a theory waiting on scientific proof. But anyway, that's the overall situation, and you've seen this before. Now, you've also seen this with these two very divergent explanations for life on Earth. You first saw evolution's explanation, that being that there was a tree of life here with a single-celled being, which we now know is a plant seed, a plant cell. And that plant cell evolved into all of these various other forms of life, including sea creatures, fish, amphibians, lizards, birds, mammals, and humans. All of the plants and animals evolved from this single-celled animal that first started out about 3.5 billion years ago. So that's evolution's theory for how human and other forms of life developed on Earth. Biblical creation is quite a bit different in that it has individual creative events. Plants were created at one particular time during days 3 and 4 of biblical creation. Sea life and birds came later. Cattle and land animals followed that, and man followed that. Whereas evolution talks about a continuum, it is biblical creation that talks about individual things that were created over time. So that couldn't be further apart, but those are the two explanations. Now you also remember hopefully seeing this. The scientific method is very important to understand because it is applied not only to evolution theory, but is applied also to some of the allied sciences that you need to understand just a little bit about in order to understand some of the consequences of science relative to biblical creation. And we've been through quite a number of those things already. But basically remember that the scientific method is a 5-stepped process. And when one goes through all 5 steps successfully, you end up at the very least with a science, an area of science, a scientific discipline. And if you have very wide breadth of data and explain all of it very well, you end up with a scientific law. If you only do the first three steps successfully, and you observe something, you develop a theory, and then you compare it to easily obtainable data, but then make predictions, and those predictions fail, and you fail to go back and loop around and do other variations of your theory, then you end up with what we call a mathematical or scientific correlation. You develop a set of equations that can reproduce the data that you have, but it's very useless for you to take that set of equations or that theory and extrapolate it outside the bounds of the data. And as you probably all are aware, if you've seen any of the tapes, my contention is that evolution theory is in this state where it is at this point, just a correlation, an idea, waiting on proof from steps 4 and 5. And it's been 150 years and no proof has yet been found. Let's go through the proof and the failures in the proof that have evolved over time, over the 150 years. And the positive proof, if you remember, that could be found for evolution, a prediction that was made, is that there should be missing link fossils. Fossils that demonstrate a being between one species and a second species. And the dominant one that has been searched for is that missing link, that fossilized evidence of some kind of a being between, let's just say, a chimpanzee, which is the current thought in evolution circles, and a human being. They have been searched, and you remember looking through these various types of potential missing human links, none of which have been found to be human links. They're all either frauds or monkeys or some other thing that's not a human, and they are not the missing human link. Also, there have been no missing links found between any other species of plant or animal. No missing links whatsoever, and that is a failure of evolution theory to this point. Doesn't mean that one couldn't be found tomorrow, but it's very unlikely right now that anyone will ever be found after this level of intense search for 150 years. On the opposite side of a coin, one of the estimations was made, one of the predictions of evolution theory was that there should be no real complex things, no real complex organs or complex parts of living animals, such that these are so complex and to take such a long time to develop that they would not fit in with evolution theory. Evolution theory requires that if something's going to change, it better be pretty rapid. If it's very slow, it will falter and fall away as a result of natural selection and survival of the fittest. Unless it's useful rather quickly, it's not going to persist in that species and certainly not going to devolve into another species. And what we found, you have seen that the human or living cell, human and otherwise, is so extremely complex that it is a complex organ, and it negates the idea that evolution is an explanation for that particular characteristic. We've talked about DNA, which is also wonderfully complex, which is another example of a complex organ, and then there are others that I have not taken the time to get into. It's a net result of both the failure to find missing link fossils and the finding of complex organs means that right now evolution fails. It is not a science yet. It has not found any proof whatsoever to make it into a science, and it either needs to be modified to account for the things that have been found or not found, or it needs to be dropped as a potential science and just considered to be a correlation. Interesting, but a correlation. Now, you remember also that from the biblical side, that a very important thing that came out of looking at that and looking at the science of the Big Bang Theory and the science of Einstein's evolution, that those two areas, when combined by Professor Gerald Schrader, a nuclear physicist and rabbi who had knowledge, one foot in both the scientific and the biblical world, he put together the calculation to show that there really is a clock for the entire universe, and that is called the cosmic background radiation clock, and it has been ticking literally for 6 universe days. That sounds a little bit unbelievable, but again, if you go back and review that cosmic clock video, you'll see what the explanation is. That, of course, the only clock that could exist for the entire universe is one that was there right at the beginning, and that clock really is the cosmic background radiation that was resulted in a Nobel Prize in 1955 for its discovery. So there is this clock that measures the age of the universe itself, and it's only about 6 days long, but it differs greatly from the Earth's clock. The universe's clock was moving at ultra high speeds close to the velocity of light for a very long time, and so it progressed very slowly. The Earth's clock has been progressing at a much faster pace and has transpired close to 16 billion years compared to the 6 days on the cosmic clock. And you recall seeing this view graph showing, or this video slide showing these various times. Day 1 was 8 billion years, day 2 is 4 billion years. And that's a very important aspect which opens up all these other areas that we've discussed in terms of investigating the timing in the Genesis account for creation and the appearance of fossils. You remember seeing this hopefully in the fossil discussion, where the days of creation, in this case day 5, where water creatures, fish, sea monsters, and birds were created according to Genesis chapter 1, and where the fossil record actually occurred within that time. The first fossil in each column, of course, is the first appearance of that creature. There's the first fish that appeared, and here are all these sea creatures that appeared right in within the window of day 5. Similarly, day 6, mammals, cattle, land animals, and man appeared again within that window, day 6. So the fossil record is supportive of biblical creation from the timeline that we see in Genesis. And that's a somewhat amazing result, but it all is a result of taking a careful look at fossil ages and that development that there is a cosmic clock for the entire universe. So that's a positive for biblical creation. You've seen this as well, and I won't go spend much time on it other than to point out that there are predominantly wins by the creation side in terms of explaining phenomena that have appeared over time. Missing links should not exist, for example. There should be no Precambrian animals that we've been through. And this agreement that we just saw with the life sequence of fossils being just in very strong agreement with biblical creation timing, when that timing is expressed with the cosmic clock. The net result of all of this and all the things that we've studied is that basically biblical creation wins the competition. That evolution is not true, at least it's not been proven to this point. It's not even really literally a science. But biblical creation has strong history, and has strong scientific support, and it therefore wins. And in my view, biblical creation is the correct explanation for life on earth, believe it or not. We've also looked at these other parts of Genesis that I presented, and authors have been writing about these in the last several years to last decade in order to show that science supports some of these concepts. And the reason I presented these because I might have convinced you that biblical creation in the first book of Genesis is the best explanation for life on earth, and evolution theory is not the best explanation. But some of you may have read further in Genesis and say, wait a minute, there were people that were living 1,000 years long. There was this great flood, and there was Adam and Eve that maybe are mythical characters. What about those? And so we've been through this series of videos, and you saw that Adam and Eve really have scientific support for their existence. And we can pinpoint that Adam and Eve, or at least Eve, we can measure lived about 175,000 years ago. And we did that by looking at mitochondrial DNA studies, and this was straight genetic science information, not done with any kind of preconceived answer in hand, just to look for the most recent common ancestor of females. We then found that the similar results done by geneticists initially gave them confusing results where they got a different answer for the males. The male was substantially younger, appeared substantially later in the time, and that was at first confusing, but we've seen that the explanation for that is in terms of Noah. All other male Y chromosomes passed away at the time of Noah, and only Noah's came forward, and that was approximately 65,000 years ago when that happened, such that all the females on earth today point back to Eve about 175,000 years ago, whereas all males today point back to Noah about 65,000 years ago as their most recent common ancestor. Though, of course, If we had had information on Adam available in today's genetic information, I'm sure that we would have pointed back to Adam at the same time as Eve. We also saw the interesting idea about 1,000-year lifetimes and saw that interesting Nobel Prize that resulted about telomeres and telomerase and how important that is to our lifestyle or to the age of our life and why we can only live about 120 years now versus potentially 1,000 years back when the telomere content was larger because the telomerase gene was turned on, if you remember that. And the last thing that you just saw, if you've been watching these in recent times, is the origin of the human races. It related to vitamin D and how humans were able to adapt and change when they moved to different parts of the earth in order to achieve just the right amount of vitamin D in their bodies to promote bone strength and to not cause problems with other organs in their body. So these various areas, and there are additional areas that I haven't had time to cover here, that have strong scientific support, scientific backing, just like biblical creation has scientific support, scientific backing to say that, hey, it's pretty likely that those were. So the final set of conclusions, let me cover this just one more time. You can turn this off if you really have seen too much of it. But basically, you've seen that biblical creation best explains life on earth. I believe it, and I think I've demonstrated to you the evidence to convince you. And it is history. I hope that's the major point, in addition to the fact that it is the best explanation. I hope that you will conclude also that it is history. It's not science, and there's no point in continuing this battle about teaching biblical creation in the science classes that we teach, because it is not science. It is history. The other accounts in Genesis that you saw also are scientifically backed, and I hope that all of that information I presented gives you strong, credible feeling that the biblical creation story and the other accounts in Genesis are really the true explanation for life on earth. Now, evolution, of course, has lost the battle. You've seen that endless number of times. It's still a scientific theory. It has no proof. It's not literally a science by the standard definition of what a science is. It is a mathematical or scientific correlation. It is not a science. And ironically, evolution is faith-based. You believe it or you disbelieve it, but if you believe it with scientific proof, you are fooling yourself. You are believing it without scientific proof. There is zero, no, nada scientific proof that evolution is true. We've seen that there's no positive proof. We've seen that there is some negative proof. And those two things combine to say that evolution is not true from a scientific viewpoint. So that concludes everything. If you've looked at all of these videos, thank you so much. And you've looked at just over 4 hours worth of videos, believe it or not. I hope you've split it up over time and maybe even looked at some of the videos a second time if you didn't quite follow it. At this point, I would hope that you have developed an opinion. You've either believed what I've said or you've disbelieved it. And I would hope that you communicate with me one way or another. One way to do it is through the guest book. You can write a brief comment there. I will have editorial control over those, not to change them, but to only put those that are at very least civil. I don't want any vulgar comments made about what I've done or things. I want it to be on a little higher plane, a civil plane, where we talk about the results and present sane, rational arguments one way or the other. So please keep things clean. I haven't emphasized it over time, but one of the things when I read a whole bunch of these books on evolution, not every single book, but many of the books were quite, I don't know what terms I would use, vulgar or inconsiderate at the very least, or unkind, in that they just couldn't withstand jibing with the biblical creation side. And I concluded, based upon all the readings of all these books, that the reason why they did that is because I really did not understand the biblical creation side. I hope that you have developed a better understanding of it through looking at these videos, and that you will, if you communicate with me through any means, that you will communicate in a civil manner. If you do it through the guest book, that will just be the comments you make. If you want to, if there's anyone out there that really wants to talk about this or discuss this or present some other information or whatever, please send me an email at dalen@whyevolutionisnottrue.com. I will read every email I receive, And if you should want a response or some dialogue, I would be glad to respond or dialogue with you and talk about things that either you don't believe of what I've said or some additional information that you found that furthers this thing. But in any event, thank you very much for looking at this series. It's been great fun developing it and taken quite a bit of effort, but I'm pleased that I'm now through.